What if a single play, lasting less than 3 seconds, had the power to rewrite the result of an entire game? What if the moment that decided a winner wasn't a walk-off home run, wasn't a strikeout in the 9th inning, wasn't a perfectly executed double play, but something so controversial, so physically aggressive, so far outside the accepted boundaries of the sport, that the league itself began asking whether the result should stand at all? That is exactly where baseball finds itself right now. One play. One first baseman. One collision that the entire sport is still talking about. And at the center of it, as he so often is, Shohei Ohtani. But this time, Ohtani wasn't making headlines with a home run or a dominant pitching performance. This time, he was at the center of something darker. Something that exposed a side of professional baseball that the highlight reels never show. The aggression behind closed plays. The physical intimidation that happens in split seconds when the cameras are focused elsewhere. The moments where the line between competitive and dirty gets crossed, and everyone in the stadium knows it except, apparently, the umpires. The Rangers' first baseman made a play on Otani that sent shockwaves through every clubhouse in the league. Players who have spent decades in this sport, men who have seen everything, were watching the replay with their jaws tight, shaking their heads slowly. And now MLB is considering something almost unprecedented. Voiding the win entirely. Stay with us. Because what happened on that field goes far beyond one controversial play. It goes to the heart of how this sport protects, or fails to protect, its greatest players. To understand the full weight of what happened, you have to go back to the inning before the play occurred. The game had been tight from the first pitch. Both teams knew what was at stake. These were not two teams playing out the string late in a meaningless September. This was a game with implications, standings implications, momentum implications, the kind of game where every single decision carries extra weight and every player on the field feels it in their chest. Otani had already made his presence felt. He had worked a difficult at-bat earlier in the game, fouling off pitch after pitch, refusing to chase, grinding the opposing pitcher deep into his pitch count. It was the kind of at-bat that doesn't always show up in the box score but changes the entire complexion of a game. The pitcher came out of that exchange visibly frustrated. His rhythm was broken. His confidence was shaken. That at-bat was a message. And the Rangers heard it. By the time Otani came up in the critical inning, the entire dynamic of the game had shifted. The Rangers knew they needed to stop him. Not just get him out, stop him. Disrupt the pattern he was building. Break the momentum he was generating simply by being in the lineup, simply by making every at-bat feel like a war of attrition that he was always going to win. What happened next was not baseball strategy. It was something else entirely. Otani hit a sharp ground ball toward the right side of the infield. In baseball terms, this is a routine play. The kind of play that happens dozens of times every single game across every stadium in the league. The first baseman fields the ball, the pitcher covers first base, the runner is retired. Clean. Simple. Over in 2 seconds. Except nothing about what the Rangers' first baseman did was clean or simple. As Otani ran through the bag, a fundamental base-running action that every player at every level of baseball is taught from childhood, the first baseman made contact. Not the incidental, unavoidable contact that sometimes happens when a fielder and a runner occupy the same space at the same moment. This was different. This was deliberate. Angled. Timed in a way that used the mechanics of the play as cover for something that had nothing to do with fielding a baseball. The force of the contact sent Otani off his natural running path. He stumbled. Caught himself. Turned back toward the field with an expression that said everything his words would not. He didn't argue. He didn't gesture toward the umpire. He didn't point at the first baseman or say anything that could be caught by a microphone. He simply looked. The kind of look that carries the full weight of what just happened without requiring a single syllable to communicate it. But the dugout had seen everything. And the dugout was not staying quiet. Within seconds, the atmosphere in the stadium shifted. Players who had been sitting relaxed on the bench were suddenly on their feet. Voices were raised. The coaching staff was moving toward the edge of the dugout with the focused urgency of people who have just witnessed something that cannot be ignored. On the Rangers' side, the response was the opposite. Calm. Almost deliberately calm. The first baseman walked back to his position without looking toward the opposing dugout. His teammates said nothing. Their body language was the body language of a team that had done exactly what it intended to do and was now simply waiting to see how the other side would respond. That contrast, one side erupting, one side completely composed, told the story of the play more clearly than any camera angle. Because genuine accidents don't produce that kind of calm. When something happens unintentionally in a baseball game, when a pitch slips, when a throw pulls a fielder into a runner's path, when contact occurs because two athletes are moving at full speed in a tight space, the player who caused the contact reacts. They check on the other player. They raise a hand in acknowledgement. They communicate, even wordlessly, that what happened was not what they intended. None of that happened. The first baseman simply walked back to his position. And in that walk, in that silence, in that complete absence of any acknowledgement, the entire story was told. By the time the broadcast team had pulled up the replay, the conversation had already started spreading beyond the stadium. Social media was moving at the speed it always moves when something controversial happens in a high-profile game, which is to say, instantly and in every direction at once. But this time, the reaction wasn't divided the way these reactions usually are. There wasn't a clean split between fans of the two teams defending their players and attacking the other side. The reaction was almost universal. Fans from every corner of the baseball world were watching the same replay and arriving at the same conclusion. What they were seeing was not a competitive play. What they were seeing was a targeted act against a specific player. And that specific player happened to be the most recognizable athlete in the sport. The replays made three things absolutely clear. First, the angle of the first baseman's body at the moment of contact was not consistent with the natural mechanics of fielding a ball and completing a play. His positioning had shifted in the final moment before contact in a way that served no defensive purpose but created maximum interference with Ohtani's running path. Second, the timing of the contact was not incidental. It occurred after the play had already been completed. The ball had already left the first baseman's glove. The mechanical justification for any physical interaction between the two players was already gone. What happened after that point had nothing to do with baseball. Third, and most importantly, Ohtani's reaction in the immediate aftermath was the reaction of someone who knew exactly what had just happened. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. The immediate, calm recognition of a player who understood in real time what had been done and chose, in that moment, to respond with dignity rather than escalation. That choice, Ohtani's choice to say nothing, do nothing, simply look and move on, became the most discussed aspect of the entire incident. By the following morning, the story had moved from the sports pages to league headquarters. MLB's decision to review the play was not announced dramatically. It rarely is. These things begin quietly, conversations between officials, requests for footage from multiple camera angles, consultations with the umpiring department, discussions about what the rulebook says and, perhaps more importantly, what the spirit of the rulebook was designed to protect. But the fact that the review was happening at all was significant. Because MLB does not casually entertain the idea of voiding a game result. It is one of the most extreme actions the league can take. It disrupts standings. It affects statistics. It sends a message that echoes through every clubhouse in baseball about what the league will and will not tolerate. The fact that it was on the table told the entire baseball world something very specific. What the Rangers' first baseman had done was serious enough that the people responsible for protecting the integrity of the game felt they could not simply look away. They could not issue a fine and move on. They could not suspend a player for 2 games and consider the matter closed. The question being asked at the highest levels of the sport was simple but enormous in its implications: if a team benefits from an illegal, deliberate act against an opposing player, should that benefit stand? The answer to that question would set a precedent that baseball would be living with for years. In the days following the play, the voices that emerged in support of Ohtani came from unexpected places. Not just fans. Not just media personalities looking for a hot take in a 24-hour news cycle that demands constant controversy. But players. Current players, across multiple teams, who spoke with a frankness that is rare in a sport where the unwritten code of keeping internal matters internal runs very deep. Veterans who have spent their careers navigating the physical and psychological dimensions of professional baseball came forward with a consistent message. What was done to Ohtani was not competitive baseball. It was not toughness. It was not gamesmanship within acceptable boundaries. It was the kind of play that, if left unaddressed, gives permission to every player in the league to make the same choice the next time they feel threatened by an opponent's greatness. That permission, these veterans argued, is the real danger. Not the individual play. Not the outcome of one game. But the message that silence would send, that if you are willing to cross a line, and if you cross it at the right moment, in the right situation, with the right player, you can get away with it. One thing that came through consistently in these conversations was the way other players spoke about Ohtani himself. Not just about his talent. About his character. About the fact that his response to a deliberate act of aggression was to say nothing publicly, make no accusations, and return to his preparation as though the controversy existed in a world entirely separate from his own. That response, more than anything else, seemed to move people. Here is the uncomfortable truth that this entire incident has forced into the open. Greatness makes people desperate. When a player operates at a level that cannot be matched through conventional competition, the temptation to find other methods, physical intimidation, deliberate interference, plays designed to send messages rather than retire runners, becomes real. It has always been real. Baseball has never been the clean, gentlemanly sport that its mythology sometimes suggests. But there is a difference between the physical intensity that has always been part of the sport and a deliberate targeting of a specific player because that player is too good to be stopped any other way. The Rangers' first baseman made a choice in that moment. And that choice was informed by everything that had happened in the game before it. By the at-bat Ohtani had ground out. By the momentum he was building. By the fear, and it is worth calling it what it is, of what Ohtani might do next if nothing was done to disrupt him. That fear is understandable. Ohtani produces that fear in opposing teams regularly. It is part of what makes him the player he is. But fear is not justification. And desperation is not strategy. MLB's decision on whether to void the Rangers' win is still pending as the baseball world waits and watches. Whatever they decide, the precedent being set in this moment matters more than the outcome of any single game. If the league voids the result, it sends a message that protecting the integrity of competition means something real. That the rules exist not just as words in a document but as a genuine framework that the sport is willing to enforce even when enforcement is uncomfortable, even when it overturns a result, even when it creates controversy of its own. If the league does not void the result, it sends a different message. One that every player in baseball will hear clearly, that there are plays you can make, in the right moment, against the right player, and the scoreboard will protect you. Ohtani, for his part, has already moved on. His preparation for the next game began the moment the previous one ended. The controversy, the replays, the league review, the voices on both sides, none of it lives in the space where he does his actual work. That space is quiet. Controlled. Completely his own. He will walk to the plate in his next game with the same focused calm he always carries. He will study the pitcher the same way he always studies pitchers. He will be ready in a way that most players can barely imagine and some, apparently, find so threatening that they feel the need to respond with something other than baseball. And when the next pitch comes, he will be ready for that too. Because Ohtani doesn't need the league to protect him. He just needs 60 feet and 6 inches. The rest, he handles himself.